I'll be talking to you about our state's transmission system and the future of transmission. Really, the cornerstone of REV is to maximize the value of the central generation and transmission system working in concert with the distribution system and all of the emerging distributed energy resources. That's what REV is all about, with one very ultimate goal, is to provide value and to put the customer at the center of that transformation. And so I will be talking about the left side of the equation, the big grid, the transmission. What will happen with transmission when our customers are installing solar panels and storage, generating their own power, cleaner power? What happens to the big grid when we build more wind farms, when we build more grid solar and community solar connected to the big grid? So I'll give you a flavor of what we are doing at the New York Power Authority and of other developers who are also in other utilities who are making some really cool and innovative projects at the big grid. Usually it's not talked about all the time because the hot area at this point is what's happening at the edge of the grid. You know, Nest thermostats, solar panels, home energy networks, all of that are the rage and conversation in our industry. But really, there's a lot going on at the big grid, very, very crucial to make the overall system work in synchronicity and an optimal way. A little bit about NYPA and the New York State transmission grid. NYPA is the largest state-owned public power utility in the United States. We have about 7,000 megawatts of generation, anchored by 70% of that large hydroelectric power projects in the state. We also own natural gas, high-efficiency natural gas plants, mostly here in New York City and on Long Island. As you can see on the map, NYPA also owns a third of the high-voltage power transmission grid in New York State. The brown lines are NYPA's transmission system, and all the other lines are transmission lines owned by other transmission owners in the state. And if you notice, we are, when I say we, NYPA, we are really the backbone of the state's transmission system, and we have all the interconnections with our neighbors in Canada, in both Ontario and Quebec. So what are we doing at NYPA? NYPA, we have, like any other utility, the big grid is aging, and we know that it has to be modernized. So a couple of years ago, NYPA embarked on an almost $730 million of what we call life extension and modernization, basically to bring our aging transmission system to the current state of the art, a very good state of repair, modernize them to make it more flexible, resilient, and connected. In addition, the Public Service Commission, now working with our New York State independent system operator, have instituted an RFP to all transmission developers, both utilities and private transmission developers, to propose projects to unclog the bottlenecks, really within like north of Utica and south of Albany, all the way to the lower Hudson Valley, where we have congestion. It's projected that the congestion is costing our customers, New Yorkers, about $9 billion a year over the next 10 years. And if you look at New York State, it's very simple. 2/3 of our generation supply are located upstate, whereas we only have 1/3 of the demand upstate. Downstate, we have 2/3 of the demand, yet we only have 1/3 of the supply. And that bottleneck is the one that we need to break to be able to bring more economical power from upstate to the load centers downstate. And that RFP is ongoing right now. NYPA, with a partner, is one of the bidders in that process. Another thing that NYPA is doing is investing in a lot of new technology. In this case, you see those green arrows pointing to our lines that connect our Niagara Power Project into central New York. We are putting what's called dynamic line ratings. In transmission, the amount of power that transmission lines can carry is determined by calculations by planners and engineers. And it's preset. Once the calculations are done, it's set, okay, transmission line A can only carry X amount of power. Well, with technology and power electronics and sensors, high-resolution cameras, we are able to put smart devices along our lines and actually measure and know how much our power lines are carrying at any time. And based on that, we could either push it up, push more power into it, or ramp it down, regardless of what the calculated limits are being put on the line. And that's very useful for the system operators like the New York ISO that operates our grid. And it's also going to be crucial when we start integrating wind farms into the power grid, because most of the wind farms are going to be upstate. In fact, of the 2,000 megawatts that we already have in the system, close to half are connected to NYPA's transmission system. So we are figuring out the best way to integrate those wind farms and future wind farms into the transmission system by applying this kind of technology we call dynamic line rating. We are also doing a couple of really cutting-edge smart grid technology somewhere between Utica, where we have our control center, our major control center of our transmission system, and the lower Hudson Valley. Let me talk about two projects. One is a device called converter static compensation device, or flexible alternating current device. In short, the way I want to describe it is they're very fast switches. And we are able, in that congested area, in the Utica part area of our state, we are able to switch power from one transmission corridor to another in milliseconds and add 200 more megawatts, for example, rechannel, reroute power when there's congestion. That is critical to the way we operate our grid and to manage congestion. It's no different than managing traffic, right, in the Lincoln Tunnel, except of pushing everything to the Lincoln Tunnel. In millisecond, you can put cars in the gardens, in the George Washington Bridge or the Holland Tunnel to go to New Jersey. But in our case, it's done instantaneously. The other project that we're doing in partnership with the New York State Electric and Gas, and I know Mark Lynch is here, who's really just been a great leader and a visionary in partnering with us to do this project, what we're calling Marcy South Transmission Series Compensation. We call it Marcy South because that's the name of NYPA's line from Utica all the way down to the Hudson Valley. By applying smart grid technology, putting capacitors, control devices basically, without adding any new lines, just applying power electronics in some cases reconductoring a short portion of the line, but no addition of new lines, no expansion of right-of-way, we are going to be able to increase the transfer of power from upstate to downstate by 440 megawatts. That's equivalent to a large power plant at a fraction of the cost. No disturbance to the viewshed, no issues with the communities along the right-of-way, again, just by the application of smart grid technology. And NYPA and NYSEG are going to commission and put that project into operation in June of this year. So just in a couple of months. Very, very exciting project in the state of New York. Another thing that NYPA is working on, you can see in the northern tip of New York, we have a large hydroelectric power project there we call the St. Lawrence FDR power project that we co-own with Ontario Power Gen. One of our existing substations in that area will be retrofitted, upgraded, and will be made into the most advanced transmission substation in the world. We are applying the most advanced power electronics, communication technology, data management technology to enhance situational awareness and visibility, protection, relay protection and control of that substation, and it will be based on a new international standard that basically sets the next generation of what substations ought to be. And why is that important? I mentioned before that we are interconnected to our Canadian neighbors and to Vermont, which is basically close to this area. And it's also the area where more wind farms are going to be developed. And wind farms are variable generation. They go up and down depending on the availability and the speed of wind. And therefore, our systems need to be able to adjust very quickly, almost instantaneously, ramp up and down, and manage that volatility and still integrate that power into our system. So that's, we call it Substation of the Future, or SAMIC. In Western New York, the coal plants in Western New York are scheduled to be either mothballed or to be retired permanently. That creates a reliability issue on the grid. So in Western New York, again, the New York Independent System Operator is putting out an RFP to all utilities, to all private developers. Give us a solution. What should be done in Western New York so that we can maintain the appropriate reliability of the system as all these big old plants and coal plants are closed. And again, NYPA, in partnership with New York State Electric and Gas, Avangrid now, as they are called, have jointly been working together and submitted a proposal to build a 25-mile, 345 kV cutting-edge transmission line in that area that will not only help the Buffalo-Niagara region, but we believe will help all the way to the Rochester area part of the power grid. Very, very important, because as we transform the power grid, as we put more clean energy generation sources, wind farms, large solar farms, hydro, including imports from Canada, from Hydro-Quebec, it will change the configuration. We have to change the configuration of the power grid. We also need to apply the latest and most advanced technology because of the issues of cyber and physical security. We want to make sure that when we start reconfiguring and rebuilding our power grid, that they can be easier to sectionalize and isolate, and that they can be self-healing so that just in case of either severe weather events, cyber or physical event, or even very low probability event but with high impact like geomagnetic storms or EMP, electromagnetic impact, that we are anticipating and responding to those type of risks. So you will see a complete reimagination and reconfiguration of the power grid, and it's already starting here in New York. I'm just going to mention a few projects that are not necessarily NYPAs, but are part of what's being planned or already permitted to be built in New York. One, there's a private developer, TDI, they call their project Champlain Hudson Power Express. They want to build a line from Quebec, underground, underwater, all the way to New York City to bring hydro from Quebec into New York City. They have a permit to do that, so what we need to wait is whether they can put together the financing to actually put shovel in the ground and get that project going. That's about 1,000 megawatts. There are also, you see at the bottom, there's a star there, Staten Island Unbottling. Con Edison is working to upgrade their interconnections with New Jersey so that they can bring more power from New Jersey to Staten Island and eventually into their system in New York City. So that's one that Con Ed is working on. Con Ed is also working with a green arrow there, Ramapo, the Rack Tavern. Also in the lower Hudson Valley, they're replacing a 138 kV, upgrading it to 345 kV line, and building another 345 kV transmission line, again, making the transmission system more robust in the lower Hudson Valley and supporting all the projects north of it and be able to receive when more power can be pushed from upstate to downstate, from excess power to the load centers down in New York City and on Long Island. So as you can see, these projects are normally not in the news. It's seldom talked because they're just large infrastructure that rolls and rolls and going forward, but they have profound implication in how we maximize the value of the changing bulk or transmission and generation infrastructure as we make all the innovation at the edge of the grid and at the distribution system. Now, New York is the place where the first power plant was invented, just a few blocks downtown at Pearl Street by Thomas Edison. The first transmission of electricity was developed and invented by Nikola Tesla from Niagara Falls to Buffalo. We are rich in history of innovation in the power industry. And I believe that now, as we implement REV and all the associated programs that we have, that New York, once again, is well positioned to reclaim its rightful position as the center of innovation and as the birthplace, once again, of the next generation of the power grid in New York. I believe that the investment decisions that we will make over the next 5 to 10 years here in New York, the technology decisions that we are going to make over the next 5 to 10 years, and the regulatory innovation that we are already have embarked on will determine what the grid will look like over the next 40, 50 years here in New York State. Thank you very much.